Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri and welcome to another illustration video tutorial. So for this week's video tutorial, the special request was that I draw Anubis, and I decided to take a different approach than my previous first attempt at Anubis. My original attempt was, in my first video, a steampunk version of Anubis. This time I went for a more realistic style since that was actually part of the request as well. Now, although I was trying to make this character more realistic anatomically and drawing-wise, I still wanted to make it look like Anubis. And since Anubis is based off more of a jackal form, he's often depicted with a black or dark skin in most cases. In certain cases, he does have more of a human-like appearance, but for this drawing, I'm going to give him darker skin tones as well. Now, because he's also a god, I did not want to actually draw the character at normal human height. Because if he's a god, he's technically not limited to normal human height at all. He could be pretty much any height. He could be essentially a skyscraper height. And that's essentially what I did with this character is I blew up his proportions in comparison to the city that he's going to be around. And this city will actually not be a traditional city. It will be more of a modern type city that he's going to actually be going into. And as a result, he's actually going in and collecting the souls as he's walking through. So there's a lot of different elements to this drawing. As you can see, I started off by roughing out the character pose before I started actually roughing out some of the background elements. And when I'm roughing out the background elements, I'm keeping it extremely rough because the main focus is the character, and I'm not really concerned about those background elements at this current time because they're going to change significantly as I work. Now, what I'm doing right now is I'm just plotting out the main areas where most of the light will actually be seen for my light source. And I'm hinting at some of the actual clothing designs. So I haven't fully fleshed out any of these elements at the moment, and I'm just trying to figure out, first and foremost, how I'm actually going to go about painting some of the anatomy. So I'm doing some rough basics before I actually go in with some color and start plotting that out. So once I have those rough basics, I added a color layer on top, and I started sampling those colors and actually using those for actually painting this. And once I had those basic colors, everything was a lot easier because I already had most of the information that I needed to work with. I already had most of the color range that I needed, so I was just sampling as I went. Now, the most difficult part was actually getting that arm movement along with a really nice dynamic pose for the upper torso. So I did actually spend quite a bit of time doing that just to make sure I had something that looked really appealing. Now, because of the perspective involved too, I also wanted to really showcase those muscles and really exaggerate that upper torso in comparison to his waist. He is a god, so technically his proportions don't have to be 100% human and they don't have to be 100% realistic either. In most depiction of Anubis, most people actually draw a thinner waistline in comparison to actual human proportions. So I was going with this as a reference point for this drawing. Now, because I did want to draw the anatomy as realistic as possible, I did spend quite a bit of time really fully fleshing out all those details. Now, this pass on the face is still a rough face for me. I will go in afterwards and actually fully flesh it out further and really give an emphasis on the jackal-like physique. So I'm just working out some of those arm muscles and shoulder muscles, getting those proportions and that proper wrapping around of the muscles. Takes a little bit longer, but it's very much worthwhile because the viewer will see that area first and foremost. And because it's closer to the viewer, I have to actually spend more time on those areas. So this arm is further back, and because of that, I am using lighter colors. Because the light has to actually travel through the atmosphere, some of those colors actually get muffled out. Working on the leg anatomy. The leg portion actually took quite a while to do, just because I really wanted to make it look realistic. And because of the type of pose that was involved, I did have to spend extra time for that. So I'm just working out a good medium between defining the muscles and showing some of that layering. I'm working on the ears right now, just defining some of the shapes. I don't have to go in too much detail for the ears, mainly because the ears will be simplified and I don't actually have to show all that much information. Now this is a quick test that I did to see what would happen if I actually used more saturated colors. I didn't like it and I actually ended up removing it because it just wasn't working. Defining further the muscles, really trying to showcase that form and making sure that the perspective in those areas are really correct before I start moving on. And I'm breaking up some of that form there and defining it further. Now I'm working on the foot. At first I drew the foot on the sideways angle and then I realized that, oh, well, this is not the correct angle in relation to the kneecap. Generally, your foot will actually be somewhat closely related to the direction that your kneecap will be facing. So for this reason, I did that modification. Breaking up some of those muscles, trying to work out which areas will be more in shadow and which areas will be lit. And I'm just really working on that out because that is the main focal point, is the facial area. So now I'm narrowing down the face because most jackal faces actually have a fairly pointed muzzle, and for this reason I had to really make it more pronounced and smaller at the tip to give that illusion. Now I'm trying to balance out the detail in the neck, and I'm just adding some more shadows in the foot to help balance out the information that should be coming from there. Working on the hand right now. Now, although I do add all the details that I need to in the hand, most of that information actually won't be seen once I start adding the souls that Anubis is actually collecting. Also, the material around his waist, I will further define it later on in this video, just to really make it look like he's more godlike. Working on the second hand here. Now what I did realize shortly after completing that hand was that the proportions were just not correct. That hand was too large in comparison to their hand. So all I did, because it was on a separate layer, I was able to just grab it and shrink it later on. So I just kept on working on it in a larger scale and then I just shrunk it down to the appropriate size. And that's what I just did right now. So this is the appropriate size for that perspective. Now I'm just starting to work on the clothing design. And I'm keeping it, once again, extremely rough to begin with because I'm not sure how I'm going to actually go about with this design. I've already figured out the general physique for the character, but I still have to figure out how I'm actually going to layer these clothing and make them look appealing. Now I do want to make this look gold, like it's gold, so for this reason I'm going in, I'm adding some more vibrant colors and lightening up certain key areas. And once those areas are added in, I'll go in and I'll actually darken other areas. Now I won't do that until I've actually figured out the proper structure. As you can see, I'm just playing around with it till I find something I actually like. And once again, because he's godlike, we don't know what that material is actually made out of. It's very silk-like, but gold-like at the same time. So it looks like metal. It looks like moving metal. And that's the illusion that I wanted to give in his clothing. And I wanted to make it really shiny for this reason. Now what I had to do after that is I needed to add some additional elements that included that same material throughout the character. If I didn't do that, then it would look out of place around his waist. So for this reason, I added some additional jewelry elements to his neck and around his arms, just to help tie in some of those gold elements into the rest of the character. By doing that, it does strengthen the overall design as well. It makes it more appealing. And in most of my reference material as well, Anubis did have something around his neck to show that he is essentially a higher power and is very much more of a deity. So I'm adding the gold element. Now, in the background, because this is further back, I'm not going to the same level of contrast as in the areas that are closest to the viewer. It is important that I keep that in mind as I'm working, because if I don't do that, it can cause some issues. So I've tied in quite a few of those elements into the character to make sure that it does look like it's not out of place in around his waist. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm actually starting to define and starting to add a secondary rim light around certain key areas of the body just to help bring out some additional forms for the character. It is important that I not overdo it though, because if I overdo it, it just won't look appropriate. So I'm just adding some perspective lines to give me a general idea of the building designs. And now I'm actually spending more time on those buildings to properly figure out the general perspective of them. Now I'm still keeping everything fairly rough, very cubic-like, because the main focus once again is the character and not these buildings. So I will actually end up removing most of the information that you see here, specifically so that you don't concentrate on those buildings. Now this drawing is nearly completed. I'm going to add some additional elements, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to start using my flat brush, and on top of this, after I've rescaled some elements, I'm actually going to fully flesh out more in a rough stage the additional elements. So I'm going to add some balconies, I'm going to add some roofs, and I'm just going to add some additional colors to that background so that it fits with the rest of the design. Because that is important that I make sure that it all fits together. So I'm keeping everything extremely rough at first, and I will actually remove almost all that information afterwards with some fog layers to make sure, once again, to tie you towards the main character, because obviously the main character is the focus. So I'm hinting at some of these elements. And I'm just keeping everything super rough. There's no reason, because most of it will be hidden anyway or hinted at. There's no reason for me to actually spend too much time on what's actually occurring in the background. Now, the one important thing to do, though, is I still have to make sure that the silhouettes look very interesting all around him. And I need to tie in some of the colors that are around the character and within the character as well. So I've actually sampled some of the gold colors and I've added that into the background to help tie in the background to the character while keeping them still separate. I've also done that with some of the blues that's in Anubis himself, his actual skin tone. And I'm just doing some modifications to the actual perspective of this building as well. Now I just quickly played around with some of those layers, see how it would look if I changed some of the perspective and added some additional layers. So I liked how that fog layer worked, but I essentially turned it off periodically just to do some modifications to the actual layout once again. Now this is the smoke-like souls that Anubis is actually essentially walking down the street, just picking them up as he goes. So these guys are not necessarily good, not necessarily evil. He's essentially collecting them because they have to come with him. So I'm adding some shine to some of the gold elements to Anubis. If you want to have your say on what's drawn for next week's video tutorial, or have some additional questions about my drawing process, please leave a comment below. I will take the feedback you guys give me and try to answer your questions while working on next week's painting. If you want to see some of my previous works, please feel free to check out the annotations on the side of this video or visit my channel for the full playlist. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.